Okay, welcome everybody to our newer witty Saturday Connect and Collaborate session. We do this every Saturday, 10 a.m. to noon Pacific, about getting people connected, learning all the new information about what is out there in our fast-moving times. We do have our summit starting on Tuesday, witi.com/events to see all the great things happening. Jeff, I'm going to kick it over to you and welcome.
Okay, great. Well, let me turn on screen sharing here and make sure this still works. Uh,
While you're doing
advance.
that, if you have questions or about it, put questions in the chat. We'll bring people up after presentation and kind of go through things. Alexis, I'm glad you're here. A lot of the talk will be about the future of program. So, Jeff, over to you.
Okay, are you able to see my
Looks
screen?
perfect. Looks great.
You can see it? Okay, great. I can't tell the green outline disappeared.
It's
Okay, yeah, my name is Jeff Turner. Thanks everyone for attending and listening to this. This is the first time for me. What I thought I would do today is just kind of go through, and I'll give you four things, hopefully, by the end of this presentation. I want to keep it fairly high level. I want to give you the computer science without getting too mathematical. And a lot of these are my own personal opinions and views after teaching some of this stuff. And I am and by no means a long-term AI expert. I've been just working with it and digging into understanding it only the last 5 or 6 years. So I'm sure there's people even in the room who have greater expertise with some of this. I'm currently an adjunct professor over at Chapman University. This semester I've been teaching, and last semester I've been teaching using something called large language models with formal methods for writing code for doing software synthesis. And previous semesters, I was working on smart contracts and Byzantine fault tolerant distributed systems. I taught a class last year on using Bitcoin with the creation of what's called a decentralized application, which resulted in a Chapman University dating DApp at the end of all of it. And I can describe that in more detail with you as we go through it. But the way I see it, and as William Gibson said, the future is already here. It's just unevenly distributed. Some of these capabilities are out there and fully available to others. I'm sure, as some of us are already living in the metaverse, while others of us don't know how to even reset our microwave clock. Just like probably some of us have already figured out how to build like an AI agent to mate guard our spouse or significant others, and are probably using it for very tyrannical purposes. And others of us are just trying to create greater and better value for humanity. So, with that, I'll get started. And feel free to interrupt me with any questions at any time. I'm happy to dig in. I might limit us if we go down too many rabbit holes, though. Okay, so one of the key differences in the way that I view things is that uh, artificial intelligence is a misnomer. It's probably better described as computer or computational intelligence, and we can view it as something that's just continued and evolved since Alan Turing came up with the Turing machine back in the late 1930s and 40s, along with a guy named Alonzo Church. These were the original theories and models for computation. They were mathematical models, and we can see where we are today by how computers have been able to redefine what we're doing. I'll go through a little bit of how we got here, what's coming, what the current zeitgeist is, what the current spirit of the times is regarding quote AI, and then how we can decentralize it and hopefully make it safer. And we'll likely see. In fact, I was just in one of the breakouts having a conversation about how this is probably going to result in a whole bunch of new billion-dollar opportunities with very, very small companies and organizations. I'll also get into a little bit of the divergence in views with some of the experts in the field, and some of whom think that we're not going to get there with our current generation of computing systems and hardware, and we need to actually leapfrog, and others think that we can just continue along this path by adding more data and more compute to the equation to make it possible for us to realize things like AGI or ASI, which stand for Artificial General Intelligence and Artificial Synthetic Intelligence, which I can dig into in just a moment. So where we've been in the past is this is a list that's not exhaustive of how the different, as it's called, algorithmic approaches have been used over time, and what gave us computing capabilities up until I guess about 15, 16 years ago, until we had what's called the machine learning a revolution that occurred after that. And we had a set of what's known as deterministic algorithms. These are algorithms whereby you would give a machine something to do, and it would always come back with the same result. Which, by the way, if you look into large language models and a lot of the machine learning, the deep networks that are a result of machine learning, you don't get deterministic outputs. But we did have non-deterministic or probabilistic systems, such as what's known as Bayesian, which is named after Thomas Bayes, who came up with probability theory a couple of hundred years ago. Then there was rule-based systems that came up in the 90s, where you probably heard of things like expert networks or expert systems. And the idea was that they might be able to do like a medical diagnosis better than a doctor. They didn't really prove out so much in the 90s, like the hope was, like we do have now with like large language models. There was also things known as dynamic programming, where systems would go out and figure out with things like genetic algorithms, where they'd go out and you'd have a bunch of individual algorithms operating on their own, and then figure out how to do what's called a search on the Turing space, which is directly related to the Turing machine, which I'll get to in the next slide. And then there's been heuristic algorithms, et cetera. So all of these things have been pretty viewed as the traditional mechanisms within computer science that we could do things. And what I'd like to impart with this presentation is that in many ways, we can just see the current revolution with AI as an evolution out of this environment and what we've been able to do in the past. The new or the next generation of systems with what's known as machine learning, generative, and deep networks, we have a whole bunch of new capabilities seemingly, but they're still based on the existing Turing machine. And the Turing machine, which was a computational model that was developed back in the 30s and 40s, and something called lambda calculus, which is the math behind that, describes a universal computer. And basically, the computer represents something like you see in that graphic there in the center. And with that computer, you have what's called a tape, and then you have the ability to move forward or backward on the tape. That really represents what you would see with computer memory. And then there were operations that could be performed by reading and writing from the tape, so that essentially this sequential machine is the way it was defined back then by Alan Turing. Anybody who's seen the movie The Imitation Game, it's a great movie on what happened here and how they cracked the Nazi codes during World War II. This is the theories that emerged from much of that work. And so what we're seeing today, particularly with generative capabilities, you probably all have used something like ChatGPT, where you've had it, you'd asked it a question, you've given it language or video or audio or even an image, and it would come up with entirely new things. At the end of the presentation, there's a reference to Jeffrey Hinton, who is now likes to say that these AIs, these LLMs, can produce better poetry than most human beings can. And then there's a whole bunch of other new capabilities. This list is also not exhaustive. There's something known as generative adversarial networks, where these are AIs that compete with one another. There's a pretty famous video on this by Lex Friedman, if any of you follow him, showing how they've been able to do this and have these things run through like a video game and do entirely new ways of maximizing their points on the video game by simply playing it with what's known as GANs, or adversarial networks. We have all kinds of capabilities, new capabilities like pattern recognition. I was just in a breakout room and we were talking about, well, how could you use something like this in with dogs or horses and train systems to recognize, say, bad behaviors amongst the dogs in a kennel, and then feed that into one of these deep networks so that you could automate or enhance your dog training capabilities. That's feasible and actually a pretty natural business that would result from something like this. The other thing that we're noticing today is that you can use these systems. I mean, I get almost perfect Mandarin translations when I go from English to Mandarin or Mandarin back, at least per the Mandarin speakers I know. And I'm using this regularly these days with things like ChatGPT to put together business proposals and such. The other big new capabilities that we're seeing that are emerging very quickly are in the areas of things like finance and biology, and pretty much any system in which you need to predict the future from some series of data in the past. These systems require enormous amounts of data to train, but they also, from that enormous amount of data, allow you to do things that we just never thought possible before in the computer science world. And this is all directly related to extending, if you will, that Turing machine you see there at the bottom. The way that this is done is that you can think of AI as just being like the Turing machine, except it's many, many different machines that are running across this thing called the neural network. And what the AIs do is they allow us to limit or better explore the search space, the tape, if you will, on the Turing machine. Now, of course, computers have evolved significantly since this model of computing came out 60 years ago, and those tapes aren't just sequential anymore. They sit in these highly distributed and parallel systems. So basically, much of AI is about exactly that, and that is how do we better explore that search space, but we're still using the existing mechanisms and machine models that we had in the past. I guess what is it, 2020? So 80 years ago, or excuse me, 70 years ago. Oh, and finally, one of the other big opportunities with these systems is in the area of anomaly detection. Again, this is by no means an exhaustive list. When we send out the slides, there's more notes if you want to get into some of the details that are part of this slide, if you want to really dig in. But anomaly detection is going to be very important for areas like cybersecurity, where you can detect intrusions into your network or your systems, where the AI is helping to monitor and secure the whole system. So these are very, very interesting areas. And a lot of us in the computer science field never really thought this was possible until this machine learning revolution came along. And now, I guess what we're calling the AI revolution could just be viewed as an extension of machine learning, but not necessarily a discontinuous change. Although some might argue it is a discontinuous change, which I'll get to here. When I was growing up, I used to be fascinated by Star Trek. I'm a boomer, and I used to watch all the original versions. I'm sure I've watched all of them at least 2 or 3 times. With the original Star Trek that came out in the '60s, it was on reruns in the '70s and such. And then a new show came out called Star Trek Next Generation, and I would suggest that we're already there. If any of you watched the original Star Trek with the original Star Trek computer, these large language models and what we're seeing with audio and video and other types of processing, other sensorial input, we've got essentially what is the Star Trek computer from that TV show back in the 1960s. And then the question becomes, where is it all going? Are we going to get to what was in Star Trek The Next Generation with a robot like Data, who had seemingly or close to human capabilities and thoughts and actions, with this notion of something called AGI or ASI? So will we get to an all-powerful brain that is equivalent to human beings, or will we not? And there's actually 2 trains of thought amongst the experts. I call it the Penrosian thought train as well as the Turing thought train. So there's those who think that the Turing machine models are going to get us to a place where we can have an equivalent of data or AGI or ASI made available to us. And there are those who think that instead we've got to come up with entirely new types of hardware and systems to do this. This is best represented by a guy named Roger Penrose. And I've included at the end of this presentation a whole bunch of resources on this. So you can click on the links at the end if you want to get more detail. But Roger Penrose wrote a book called The Emperor's New Mind. I think it's been about 8 years ago now. And he basically articulates that in order to get to this AGI data level of AI, we need to create what's called a super Turing machine, or what he articulates as a universal computational engine that may involve some quantum elements to it. And so that's the big area of divergence of views, I think, out there, especially in the research community. And whether this is going to be one way or the other, we really don't know yet. But there's experts aligned on both sides of the fence on that one. In my view, I'm sure you have all heard about the challenges with AI, namely safety, trust, human-centered values, and the great risks that you see with like technocratic totalitarianism or censorship, where AIs themselves are going to become censored. This was made famous. I'm not getting political here, but this was made famous about a year and a half ago, where somebody asked I think it was ChatGPT to write a poem, a positive poem about Donald Trump, and then did the same thing for Joe Biden and got completely different results asking the AI. So these systems have been designed to be trained in such a way that they were obviously set up to censor and be, quote, politically correct. There is also examples of this in places like China. There was a famous video from, I think it's been about 6 years ago or so, on Bloomberg TV, where they showed how there were some individuals that I think they were either Indian or Singaporean who were working in Shanghai, China. And they went and walked across the street and jaywalked back from lunch. And when they did so, the AI had captured their faces. And by the time they arrived back into the office, they were already ticketed and their bank accounts were debited for the jaywalking ticket. So we're living in very, very interesting times. We could face technocratic totalitarianism. We could wind up getting what I call troglodyte AI, in which the censorship is so rampant, or the thought control is so great that if we want to use these to assist us and for our tools, we really need to make sure that that we keep these systems open. And one of the key notions here is that we can develop open source technology. And for any of you who live in California, you may have heard about this bill that was being sponsored by one of the, I think it's one of the state senators out of San Francisco, to push for mandating that AIs that had more than certain level of capabilities, they would hold the developers, and this would include what's known as open source developers, completely liable for any bad results that might emerge, as well as restrict what could be released by these teams. That also came out through the Biden administration through an executive order earlier this year that was very similar to that. If you want to dig into this, actually it's a censored video of Eric Schmidt basically talking about some of this at Stanford University about 8 months ago, where he was articulating why this was necessary. And there's some views that this is just purely and simply a way to do regulatory capture by the big AI companies. But in order to keep these human-centered values and ensure that we have safety and trust in the systems, I think that decentralization is key. In fact, there is an AI system, if you're concerned about censorship or being monitored as you use it, one called Venice AI, that's attached at the end of the presentation. And you can use that one, and it's completely distributed. You can pay for its usage with Bitcoin. And I think this is probably the direction in general we're going to head. We're now seeing from Meta, formerly Facebook, as well as people like Elon Musk with Grok, a push toward using open source. And hopefully we'll see that that will also occur so that we get into better decentralized tech as a result of doing all this, so that we don't have to worry about some of these totalitarian or censorious regimes emerging with AI. So the way I view this is that if we really look at what we hear out there in the press and what we see going on, there's a great deal of hyperbole around this, but there's also a lot of despair and denial. I was just talking earlier in one of the breakouts about, what's this going to do to programmers and how software development occurs. My personal view is that since I teach undergrads, is that software development is going to become that much more important, and then taking control and keeping humans in the loop to manage these things will become that much more important as a result. And I'm actually not seeing people who are well trained to know the latest state of the art, because a lot of using AIs, and especially with large language models, is in knowing the art behind using it, and we're rapidly developing the science. But I had like students, seniors from last year, that were graduating and making $200,000 a year immediately out of school just by doing something called prompt engineering. And these were systems that basically you figure out how to use OpenAI or Anthropic or one of the other models, Grok or Google's Gemini, and you figure out how to set up a sequence of prompts and manage them to set up really good systems that allow us to get better results from them. Because one of the fundamental issues, as I mentioned in the old traditional algorithms, is that we're used to programming deterministic systems, and these AIs, particularly LLMs, are non-deterministic. You can ask it the same question twice, and you won't get the same result coming back. So part of that art is figuring out how to get that consistency. The other things that I think in this triangle of despair, denial, and hyperbole are related to, where will Turing machines go, and what will the quantum computing impact be on these? I personally happen to fall into more the Penrosian path and think we're going to need fundamentally new computational machine architectures to really get to where we want to go with AGI and ASI. The other part of this is something known as crash and Byzantine fault tolerance. Most of you who are in the crypto or blockchain space already know what this is, but there was a famous example from 50 years ago where it was shown that Satoshi Nakamoto with Bitcoin solved in a scalable way what's called the Byzantine generals problem. And basically what this amounts to is that you can build highly resilient systems that are very distributed, and one of them can be a bad actor on the network, including having, say, a bad AI, while the others will continue working along and giving you accurate results as a result of that. The other open question in this space right now is, where do centralization and decentralization fit? We almost certainly have to do centralized training of these AI models, but we can probably decentralize the inference. And so figuring out that balance and those boundaries is going to be key to getting that trust, safety, and alignment that I mentioned in the previous slides. Which brings me to the second to the last slide here. As I see it, and I think if any of you follow like the All In podcast, this is conformant, I think, with their views. We're going to see rapid productivity improvements, particularly with software development. And we're also going to see much smaller organizations emerging who can make the most use of AI. I compare this roughly to what we saw with WhatsApp back in 2014, where they paid about $290 million per employee. Facebook did when they acquired that company. And then if you look currently with companies like Ifinex, who's behind Tether, they're making profits of $50 million per employee per year. Or it's actually, I think, greater than that at the moment. So highly profitable companies, highly valuable companies. And, these companies, I think Tether has about 50 employees. I think WhatsApp, it was about 60. I would expect that we'll see these things scale down as we get those productivity and profit boosts. And in fact, in the breakout sessions today, there was people bringing up ideas. They're probably the next 10 or 100 million or $1 billion companies that will take very, very little resources. You can probably start these organizations up. I got a bid. I do an outside software consultancy with open source developing blockchain and smart contract apps. And I got a bid the other day with a group that thinks they can build $100 million company with 5 people to redefine how education goes, particularly with homeschooling. So there's lots and lots of opportunities out there like that. I mean, just brainstorm a little bit with your favorite business contacts, and I think you'll find them. But I expect we'll see some sort of blend going forward with these kind of next generation companies as a result. Okay, this is just the conclusions I'd like to leave you with is that I prefer to describe computer intelligence as opposed to artificial intelligence because it's an extension of the current Turing machine systems that we've had for the last 70, 80 years. I also expect that we're going to transition from that crash fault tolerant computing to Byzantine fault tolerant, which means that you decentralize AI, you leverage open source, and that will result in better paths for trust, safety, and alignment. I think much of what's going on, especially politically with those executive orders and that proposed legislation here in California, was just designed to do regulatory capture for some of the bigger AI companies that are out there already. And because of this Turing machine question, we are seeing a divergence in views amongst the key experts, and I'll give you some resources here at the end if you want to dig into that further. That are most definitely working toward creating systems that will allow us to still go through this discontinuous change. I think even with the Turing system style, and if we don't get to what Penrose wants us to do with quantum computing and creating the super Turing machines, we're still going to have many, many $10 billion opportunities awaiting us. And here's a set of resources. I'm not sure, David, if we send out these slides or not, but if you want to click on any of these links, you can get into this in more detail. And then I've got a set of notes here as well. If anybody wants to follow through and learn more about this or the experts behind it, I would highly, highly recommend that at the very least, if people are really interested in this, if you're into SEO, search engine optimization, check out this video here talking about how SEO has fundamentally changed now in just like the last 8-9 months as a result of AI. So that's it for me. Feel free to raise your hand and ask questions.
Thank you, Jeff. Yeah, great. I think it's only just begun. Dave, you're off mute. Did you have a question?
Yeah, actually, I guess I've heard the counter argument to don't panic, to panic rather, as being there's all these great opportunities now, and you can do it with smaller and smaller companies. But given that there's a limited amount of cash to be made, it stands to reason that you do end up with an excess labor pool of people who, you end up with two things. You end up with an excess labor pool that you don't need anymore. And you also end up with a lot of businesses that can be made with very small groups of people with the help of AI, which are very duplicatable with AI with another small group of people, particularly with like a larger company that sees, oh, this small company proved out this idea with this tiny team. Why don't we do it ourselves just as easily? What are your, I guess, what are your retorts to that?
Yeah,
as far as
I think another way of looking at that is what are the competitive moats that you can build? What are the barriers to entry that you can create when you create your AI company or some AI-based business? And one of the key aspects of that is how do we raise capital? So what's the capital structure, formation, and allocation look like? I'm going to share another graphic to try to help address that, which wasn't kind of part of the core presentation here, but let me just open that up. The way I see it is that I'm not sure if you guys, hopefully you can see that. So this is up on my LinkedIn if you want to check it out up there. But I think we're going into an entirely new era of capitalism that AI is just going to support. We basically went through a colonial era of capital formation, then post-colonial after we created these joint stock corporations and then put them on public markets. And then we've had a free enterprise era up until the advent of Bitcoin and Satoshi Nakamoto and such. So we've gone from debt-based public capital to this new form of community capital. And so in my view, one of the ways to build those competitive moats is to get out there and do a tokenization of your AI project. And there's a bunch of them out there. If you look at the recent Bitcoin price, I think it's up to about, actually right now it's $91,000. So that's $3 trillion in market capital that is available out there in the crypto markets. There's, I think, 20,000 projects. There's a variety of mechanisms that you can do to set these things up. What I happen to be working on is this one here, which is called smart assets. So basically, we're going from an era in which we have digital assets like Bitcoin to smart contract-based systems like Ethereum and the others. We just recently, in the last 6 months or so, have created these things called smart wallets. And I suspect that when you want to get into doing one of these opportunities, you're going to be using a smart asset with something either known as a purse or a bag. And basically what that means is that the smart contracts will be associated with AI models, and you'll be able to sell those things on the open market. So getting your capital position built and building your community, I think, is key to creating that competitive moat going forward. Does that help answer the question?
Yeah, sort of. I sent you a little instant message where I'd love to get your thoughts on other approaches to making that more sustainable.
Yeah, and then you're always going to have limited amounts of data, and training and getting access to the data for these things is going to be super important. Okay, I got your message. Thanks, Dave.
Yeah, let's continue that, because I think we'll continue to have open forums to talk about all these things. But Alexis, I know you have a comment about some of this.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Can you hear me well, though?
Yeah,
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, I'm in the middle of New York. Well, first of all, you mentioned Venice AI, but I suppose it's also worth mentioning that Venice AI runs on top of Morpheus, is MOR.org. That's actual decentralized network that decentralizes their inference. And I live in Puerto Rico and actually know the founders of and the people who really work actively on Morpheus.
Is that a Koch network, Alexis?
No, it's MOR.org. That's the Morpheus. That's actually the Venice runs on top of that. That's the actual decentralization. Right.
Okay. So yeah, because I just happened to see a podcast with Eric Voorhees. This is from a few months ago, where he was sitting with the Akash network.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I just know Brian, who's one of the founders.
Which decentralized platform they use? Yeah.
Okay. So that's and then to the David's point. Sorry, the connection is a little bit lagging. To the David's point, I'm coming from software development many years, and I used to have, I still have an agency for rep software development, and now it's software development with AI. But the way it's going, I actually do not see need for so many software developers anymore, because as to Dave's point, we building software, and software that is no longer an IP. Anybody can do that. I can build a platform in 3 or 4 days now with AI, maybe one more engineer, something that would take me 3-4 months to build a year ago, and something that would take like 3 years in another company to build. So, and yeah, that's
I've had similar experiences myself. Yeah.
Yeah. So things the software is becoming so, especially once we have this modern, very productive frameworks, like React and Vercel and Django and Odoo and Flutter. where you can replicate any idea. So the value now is probably going to be in the actual real world business, whatever that is going to be, if you're going to metaverse, right? Rather than the technology that supports this, because any business would be able, if you have customers, if you have a product, then the software, it's kind of, you know, uh, AI can build it very soon, or just maybe one CTO who knows how to use AI. So I would like to get your thoughts. Why are you so optimistic about the software industry? I would like to be optimistic as well, but I'm not. I'm just thinking that I need to look for other businesses leveraging my software development skills.
You guys still there?
Oh yeah, you're here, Jeff. I turned off the screen sharing
Uh,
so and clogging stuff up. But did you hear Alexis's question about?
Oh, I think I heard most of that. It went dead. So, where does my optimism come from with my software engineers? One thing I tell my students, I've been saying this for the last year, is that you need to shift left. In the software engineering world, shifting left means getting closer to the customer. So, software engineers, I expect, will be much more like product owners or product managers in the future because they can operate at much higher levels of abstraction. And therefore, what you really need as part of your team is analytical thinking skills, analytical thinking skills, and critical judgment. Those are going to be the key things to develop. What we have seen so far, at least per academic studies, and there's a good one done out of the Stanford Economics AI group, um, showing that if we look on the curve between junior and senior developers, there's sort of two-thirds, three-quarters of the way up the curve, we see the best productivity increases with folks that are mid to senior software engineers as opposed to junior ones, because still the AIs are producing a lot of crappy code, and you need very good judgment to figure out what's good and what's bad with them. And then the other part of the view, is a continuation of Mark Andreessen's view from his paper from, I think it's been 12, 14 years ago, called Software Eats the World. And as he likes to say, even this current day and age, there is an overwhelming need for more and more software systems, especially as you apply it to new areas of capability, like we were mentioning about with with all the generative AI and machine learning opportunities that abound out there. I mean, I still can't get a good Kroger app that works properly when I go to the store, and frankly, I got tons of problems with my Starbucks app. When AI fixes the quality issues and a lot of the mismatch between product market fit that we see with those things, and I believe that this is coming because we're like as I said earlier, we're going further and further toward science and not art of using these things. As we get the science down, hopefully those things get fixed. But I still see a whole bunch of holes that can be filled with software systems, and that's where my optimism comes from. And plus, I always tell my students they should be going out there if they're seeing a down cycle in their pay, because most students would be getting 120, 130K out of school as computer science majors. In my experience, the ones that are self-taught and want to continue learning are actually doubling their salaries from what we saw just a few years ago. But again, they're on the newest cutting edge, leading edge stuff.